In 1928, the FBI conducted its first-ever criminal profiling investigation, when an agent was asked to look at the writings of the killer to see if he or she could determine anything about that person's background and state of mind. Today, we have several successful examples of criminal profiling, such as John Douglas and the FBI's Behavioral Science Unit, which created the term and applied it to criminal investigations. From studying an offender's letters to creating entire psychometric tests, American profiling aims to identify the characteristics of an offender based on his or her behavior at the crime scene. However, it is important to remember that criminal profiling is not an exact science, and the accuracy of a profile can vary widely depending on the skill of the profiler and the nature of the crime. Despite this, many law enforcement agencies around the world continue to use profiling as a valuable investigative tool, especially in cases where there is little other evidence to go on. For example, in the United Kingdom, the Metropolitan Police Service has a program called Project Target, which uses data mining techniques to identify individuals who are suspected of being involved in terrorism or serious organized crime. Once identified, these individuals are then placed under surveillance and their activities are monitored closely. While it is comforting to know that law enforcement has these tools at their disposal to catch criminals, it is also scary to think that our appearance and behavior can be used to predict our likelihood to commit crimes. However, it is important to remember that criminal profiling is not an exact science and should not be used as the sole basis for making decisions about someone's guilt or innocence. Some believe that it is inherently flawed and that no amount of profiling or data analysis can make it work. There is no one-size-fits-all approach to crime fighting, and every case is unique. While profiling may provide some insights into the mind of a criminal, it should not be used as the sole basis for making decisions about how to investigate a crime. In the end, catching criminals is a complex and challenging task that requires a multifaceted approach. While criminal profiling may not be the answer, it is certainly an interesting and evolving field that is worth paying attention to. For example, the infamous case of the Yorkshire Ripper highlights the limitations of criminal profiling. We would appreciate it if you could leave us a comment below with your thoughts on the matter. Thank you for watching. For more comprehensive information, go to http://books/Stephen-F-Myler and review the sources. Despite extensive efforts by law enforcement to catch the killer, he remained at large for several years and was only caught when a police officer recognized the importance of focusing on a particular type of victim. This case, along with many others, has led some to believe that intuition and experience are just as important, if not more so, than profiling when it comes to solving crimes. Instead, it should be used as one piece of evidence among many others when making judgments about a person's character. If any suspicious activity is detected, law enforcement officials can intervene and potentially prevent a crime from occurring. This could be a valuable tool for law enforcement, as it could potentially help them to catch criminals more quickly and efficiently. However, there are also concerns that AI may not be accurate and could lead to innocent people being accused of crimes they did not commit. Additionally, there is the concern that AI may perpetuate existing biases in the criminal justice system. As AI becomes more advanced, it will be important to carefully consider the potential benefits and risks of using it for criminal profiling. It is possible that AI could revolutionize the way that law enforcement agencies operate and could lead to a significant decrease in crime. However, it is also possible that AI could cause more harm than good. Ultimately, the decision of how to proceed with AI and criminal profiling will be a difficult one for society to make. Similarly, in the United States, the FBI has a program called the Gang and Terrorism Statistics and Analysis System, which allows law enforcement agencies to share information about gangs and gang members in order to prevent gang-related violence. This type of profiling has been controversial, however, with critics arguing that it is a form of mass surveillance and that it violates the privacy rights of citizens. Supporters of social profiling argue that it is a necessary tool for law enforcement in the fight against terrorism and serious crime. They contend that by identifying and monitoring potential threats, authorities can prevent crimes from happening and keep communities safe. The debate over social profiling is likely to continue as technology advances and new methods of data collection and analysis become available. It remains to be seen whether governments will use these new tools to crack down on crime, or whether they will be seen as a threat to civil liberties. In fact, in some cases, profiling has led to the identification and apprehension of suspects who would otherwise have remained free. He was a serial killer who targeted young women in the 1970s. Bundy was described as being charismatic and good-looking, which allowed him to lure his victims into his car under false pretenses. He was also said to be highly intelligent, which helped him evade the police for many years. Another example is Jeffrey Dahmer, a serial killer and rapist, who was active in the 1980s and 90s. He was known for his bizarre behavior, including keeping parts of his victims' bodies as souvenirs and engaging in cannibalism. One of the main differences between the American and British approaches to criminal profiling is the level of emphasis placed on the criminal's background. American profilers tend to focus more on behavioral indicators, such as the modus operandi or signature of the crime, while British profilers are more likely to consider the offender's personal history and motivations. This difference in approach can lead to different conclusions about the nature of the offender and their behavior. Despite the low statistical rate, the profiles have another aspect: time saving. The profile may not identify the actual criminal, but does steer the investigations away from obvious non-starters, and so saving valuable time in the search. For example, if an investigator finds that the killer moved the victim's body after the murder, he or she may conclude that the murderer is most likely a man because, statistically speaking, women don't move bodies around. Some critics argue that it is nothing more than a form of pseudoscience, and that there is little empirical evidence to support its effectiveness. Others have raised concerns about the potential for bias and discrimination in criminal profiling, as well as the possibility that it can lead to wrongful convictions. Despite these concerns, criminal profiling remains a popular tool among law enforcement agencies and is often featured prominently in crime dramas on television. Only time will tell how the field of criminal profiling will continue to evolve, and whether it will eventually be replaced by more scientific methods of investigation. Meanwhile, British profilers take a more nuanced approach, focusing on the circumstances surrounding the crime rather than the crime itself. This type of profiling can be useful in cases where there is limited information about the offender, such as when a serial killer is targeting different victims in different areas. By studying the geographical patterns of the crimes, investigators can often narrow down the possible locations where the offender resides, making it easier to identify and apprehend them. A simple idea being that criminals operate in familiar areas to where they live, and so feel safe, or alternatively an adjacent area away from their home. However, this does not work for traveling killers who cross state lines or in the UK shires. So while American profilers might look at the physical evidence left behind at a crime scene, such as fingerprints or DNA, British profilers are more likely to focus on the victim's relationships, financial status, and other factors that may have contributed to the crime. The British tend to rely on contracted criminal or clinical psychologists to give an outline of the personality of the criminal, whereas the USA use history in interviews with jailed serial killers, for example, on the assumption all killers have a signature methodology, often a mistaken belief, leaving the British more successful. Criminal profiling has come a long way since the early days. But is it just Hollywood fiction brought to life? Can law enforcement really accurately assess someone's personality, behavioral patterns, and even their appearance based on the crimes they commit? And how much can we trust psychological profiling? This is a fascinating and complex topic that goes beyond just whether or not someone is a sociopath. Stay tuned as we delve into the intriguing world of criminal psychology and explore what science really tells us about what a criminal's appearance might reveal about them. Before we begin, we would like to thank you for your support. Please subscribe to our channel. The United States and Britain both use profiling techniques, but they do so in different ways. In terms of statistical success, there is a general consensus among experts that profiling works about 3% of the time. However, it is also worth noting that criminal profiling has been the subject of much debate and controversy over the years. One of the things that criminal psychologists do is geographical profiling, which involves analyzing the location of crimes to try to identify where the offender lives or works. Another example of criminal profiling is social profiling, which is typically done by government agencies to try to prevent crime before it happens. A few examples of famous criminal profiles that were allegedly created by law enforcement include Ted Bundy. Overall, the idea of criminal profiling is both fascinating and unsettling. As artificial intelligence continues to advance, It is possible that computers will be able to create detailed profiles of criminals with a high degree of accuracy. It is important to note that not everyone involved in law enforcement or the criminal justice system has faith in the system. While criminal profiling can be a useful tool for law enforcement, it is not a panacea for all of the problems that they face. We hope that you have enjoyed learning more about criminal profiling from Dr. Stephen F. Myler's insights.